Hello, I'm Miloš Lewiński and you're watching TVP World Talks, where every word matters. Now, one of the headlines today has been the unexpected visit of NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg to Hungary. Hungary proved to be a difficult ally, time and time again in recent times, especially given its stance on Ukraine. And this latest meeting was all about agreeing to disagree. But what does it mean for the rest of NATO, especially given the continuing Russian threat? We're going to ask this and many other questions to our guest today, Mr. Zoltán Fehér, geostrategist and non-resident fellow at the Atlantic Council. Hello and welcome to TVP World.
Thank you very much for having me.
So let us begin with this meeting. There were some rather unusual phrases being thrown around there, and fundamentally it was all about allowing Hungary not to participate in the efforts to help Ukraine. Before we go into any details, what is your general impression following that meeting?
My general impression is that Secretary General of NATO, Jens Stoltenberg, went to Hungary to make sure that the unity of the North Atlantic Alliance stays intact, and that he tried to smooth over some differences with Hungary, with the Hungarian government, and find a modus vivendi with the Orbán government. I think overall it went well for both sides. I think they found a compromise by which they can both present the outcome of the meeting as beneficial to their own organizations and constituencies. Hungary was able to save face by having the Secretary General of NATO agree that Hungary will continue not to be part of any assistance and support to Ukraine in the framework of NATO. On the other hand, Secretary General Stoltenberg was successful in making sure that Hungary will not continue to block any measures that the rest of the alliance members want to put forward to support Ukraine financially, militarily, and politically.
So overall, they are presenting this as a win-win situation. Now, before we examine whether this is really the case, let us listen briefly to what both Mr. Jens Stoltenberg and Mr. Viktor Orbán had to say during the meeting.
Hungary is a loyal and dedicated member of NATO. We made it clear that we do not intend to block any decisions in NATO. Every military operation outside of NATO's territory should be based on voluntary participation. For Hungary has been granted the guarantees that it required.
I welcome your statement that you will remain a dedicated and loyal NATO ally. No Hungarian personnel will take part in these activities, and no Hungarian funds will be used to support them.
So overall, it seems that Hungary got what it wanted, right? The agreement was about Hungary being able to be unhelpful with regards to Ukraine while not blocking any initiatives. One other phrase, which was not actually quoted here, and which I found to be particularly interesting, was Mr. Stoltenberg saying essentially that modalities of Hungary's non-participation have been agreed upon, which seems to be a rather interesting way of going around the issue. So what would you say is going to be the consequence of that? Because having a NATO ally being legally unhelpful, well, it does look a bit like the situation with Turkey, except Turkey is in a totally different position there, and it has been so for a while. Do you think it is actually a good thing that the Hungarian government will be able to benefit from these exemptions?
Let me start by saying that the context of this meeting was that Hungary has refused to participate in any NATO missions supporting Ukraine financially, politically, or militarily in the framework of the alliance. It has also vetoed or blocked many initiatives within NATO over the past 2 years that aimed to help the Ukrainian side against Russia. Now, I agree with you that the Secretary General's phrasing could be described as somewhat unusual and even funny, but the fact of the matter is that every out-of-area operation and supporting Ukraine qualifies as an out-of-area operation for NATO. It only requires member states to voluntarily sign up, meaning every out-of-area operations is open to every member state to voluntarily choose to be part of it or not. Hungary has had its legal right not to participate. So I wouldn't call this a legal exemption. On the other hand, the overwhelming majority of NATO members have been on board with these operations and missions supporting Ukraine within the framework of NATO, and Hungary has been one of them and was one of the staunchest NATO members to oppose and veto them. I believe that the reason for the Secretary General to make this trip was to make sure, as I said before, to find a modus vivendi by which both sides can save face. I don't think the Hungarian government is going to particularly benefit from this, from this arrangement. I think what they wanted to do is avoid any further communication confrontation when it comes to Ukraine. I think it would be more beneficial for the alliance and for Ukraine if Hungary participated in these missions. But since the Hungarian government has built its entire foreign policy and domestic political agenda on not supporting Ukraine, that was not possible for Secretary General Stoltenberg to achieve.
So now you rightly noted that not supporting Ukraine has been at the center of Mr. Orban's agenda for quite a while now. Why do you think is this so? I mean, is it simply because he feels no sympathy towards President Zelensky? Or is it more about the economic dependency on Russia, for example?
Hungary's foreign policy has been oriented towards Russian interest for quite a while, for about 10 years now. So we can say that its foreign policy has a very strong pro-Russia and pro-China orientation. And I think that explains why the Orban government has refused to support Ukraine within the EU or within NATO. In the past 2 years since the Russian aggression against Ukraine.
And you've mentioned the European Union, which brings me to the next issue here. Regardless of what the motivation of Mr. Orban was, he has been very unhelpful when it comes to European initiatives regarding Ukraine, actually blocking many of them, including those related to the seizure of Russian assets. Now, with the Hungarian presidency just around the corner, what do you expect to happen on the EU forum?
Orban has talked about the EU presidency as Hungary's opportunity to shape the EU's agenda, especially on foreign policy. I do not think that the Hungarian government will have the possibility to strongly shape the agenda as the presidency of the EU Council, which Hungary is about to take over on 1st of July, mostly gives governments holding the presidency the right to determine the scheduling and the agenda of EU Council meetings, but they have very little opportunity to strongly shape agendas, meaning the substantial parts of those meetings.
So with that in mind, of course, Mr. Orban will want to seek further and additional allies to his cause. He is eyeing the Balkans, for example. He's also searching among the far-right parties within the European Union. But it does seem that there is one particular potential ally which Viktor Orban expects to be able to help a lot if he returns to power. I'm talking, of course, about Donald Trump. Apart from once referring to Viktor Orban as the president of Turkey, it does seem that Mr. Trump really does share this sentiment. He said recently that he really wants to work with Viktor Orban. He's looking forward to it. Do you think that in the event of Trump returning to power, the entire dynamic within the Euro-Atlantic alliance could actually become warped or modified in a way that many countries would find distinctly uncomfortable?
I do not think so. First of all, Prime Minister Orban's expectations that the far right will surge in the European parliamentary elections have only partly been justified by the results of the European Parliament elections last week. It is true that the radical right and far right, extreme right parties in the European Union have increased their votes and have increased their share of the seats in the European Parliament. But they are still very much divided into two groups, ECR and ID. And it is important to note that Orban's party Fidesz is not a member of either far-right grouping in the European Parliament. So they have made gains on the European front, but they haven't really united their allies within the European Union. And so that is the work ahead of them. But overall, the mainstream parties did fairly well, especially the European Parliament, the European People's Party won more seats than they did 5 years ago, and so they are the winners of the European Parliament elections. But the European Commission's head, Ursula von der Leyen, still lacks a clear majority to be re-elected. So the European front is to be seen, and Prime Minister Orban's. The second part of Prime Minister Orban's plan was to add President Donald Trump being reelected as his ally, and they're very close. They're friends and allies, and President Donald Trump has a very strong chance of being elected to the presidency come November. However, I do not believe that Trump and Orban's alliance and some surging of the far-right parties in the European Parliament will strongly modify the dynamics within the EU. It is true that the mainstream parties have a harder time during this coming term, than they had in the past 5 years. They had a much clearer majority. They don't have a clear majority now because the Social Democrats and the Liberals especially lost a lot of support in different countries. So we have yet to see how those dynamics play out. It's clear that we have some turbulence ahead.
And of course, alliances and liaisons can be temporary. I mean, look at Stormy Daniels, after all. And on that slightly less serious note, we end this conversation, but we'll be coming back to the topic because it is truly fascinating. Zoltán Fehér was our guest today here on TVP World. Thank you very much for joining us and for sharing your expertise.
Thank you very much for having me.
And I'm Nash Rewinski. You're watching TVP World. Please stay with us here on our channel for more latest news and updates.